to Something for the Turbo, the new weekly podcast brought to you by Unfound, the global platform for the travel-loving cyclist. Today we're joined by renowned bike fitter and founder of Edinburgh Bike Fitting, Dougie Shaw. He's joined us again after a fascinating conversation last week on Fit for Your Turbo and general tweaks and checks that you can do while at home using your turbo. Today we're going to be talking about bike shoes, inner soles, cleats and pedals in great depth, and it's a fantastically interesting conversation. Certainly I clearly didn't know what the ball of my foot was until we engaged in this chat, but very much enjoyed it. Before we head over to Dougie, please do subscribe to the podcast, give us a rating, give us a 5 stars, share the podcast with your friends, and of course, as ever, please do join us on the hub, download the Unfound app. But without further ado, here's Dougie Shaw. Dougie, welcome back. Thank you very much for coming back on to join us. And today we're going to be speaking about shoes and cleats. Is that correct?
Yeah.
How are you?
I'm all right. Yeah. Thanks for inviting me back on, and thanks everyone who's listened to the first podcast for your feedback and questions, because it's got me thinking and looking around the world of bike fit again to sort of answer these questions properly. So yeah, I'm excited to be back, and I'm doing well. Thank you.
Very good. Well, as you mentioned, we've got a number of questions that we can probably go through towards the end that people have sort of sent us on the hub. I don't know how best to kick this off. I mean, in terms of shoes and cleats, there are so many different variables. Where would one start? I mean, given that we suspect that most people listening are experienced cyclists, what should people be thinking about in terms of their next purchase or their current shoe and pedal setup? Where's a good starting point?
Yeah, okay, that's a good question. I think on the same note as we were on last time, you have to understand that the way that your foot and pedal system and your shoe and cleat position, it's all part of a system, and a lot of factors depend on another thing, if you like, being right, or at least not wrong enough to cause a problem. So what you're thinking when you're buying a shoe would be, is this shoe going to allow my cleat position to be correct? Is this shoe going to, if you like, encapsulate my foot so that it's not restricting my foot and really squashing it into a position? Is it going to be big enough to allow my foot not to get restricted? Is it going to be small enough so that it doesn't feel like it's just flopping around like a paper bag, if you like, around my foot, so my foot is nice and stable inside the shoe? And with the cleat position, again, yeah, thinking back to the shoe and the cleat, is the drilling, is the fore-aft drilling going to allow my cleat position to be sat underneath the metatarsal bones, if you like, the ball of the foot, where I want to be able to sort of achieve a nice stable cleat position? And yeah, so there are a lot of things that you can do wrong, if you like, if you buy the wrong shoe. And I think another thing worth mentioning is a lot of the time the shoe doesn't have to be necessarily overly expensive or overly cheap, if you like, to be the right thing. I think it's just being a bit more informed as to what you're wanting your shoe to deliver to your position, and how these factors, how the factors that I guess we're going to go on to talk about will potentially give or take away from what you're trying to get out of your position, or be it your road cycling position or your time trial position, or just your comfort of your foot and the control of your foot.
Okay, so is there an order that people should be thinking about this in terms of, so the pedal and the cleat is the main thing that I am in touch with on the bike. Do we start with the pedal and the cleat and then look at the shoe, or is that the wrong way to think about it? What's the best way to think of before we get onto the shoes? How can people have a quick assessment of, am I using the right pedals as a starting point? What do different pedals sort of give me? And then secondary, how do we think about setting our cleats up and then onto the shoe? Is that the right way to look at it, or is it the wrong way around? What's the best way to think about it?
We could start from pedals, if you like. I mean, a lot of people already have pedals across their range of bikes, and a lot of the time, to be fair, a lot of the time you can go a lot more wrong with a shoe being wrong than you can with a pedal. That being said, there are certain pedals don't suit everyone, and I think it's important to note that there would be a reason why you might want to go for a pedal brand that will allow you to have, for instance, an increased stance width with like a longer axle, so that's Shimano and Speedplay, or a really, really low stack height, kind of system stack height from your, like, the bottom of the cycling shoe to the middle of the pedal spindle. There'd be reasons as to why you'd want that to be as small as possible. So but a lot of the time, and we can go into those too, but a lot of the time people already have a raft of pedals, if you like. They've got about 6 pairs of Kios or 4 pairs of Speedplay or like 3 pairs of Shimanos that would be across all their different bikes. It'd be very difficult, very expensive to start switching. So I think that a lot of the time people are buying shoes certainly more often than they're buying pedals. So maybe we'll start with shoes and then I'll bleed the conversation into pedals as we go. But
just quickly before we go on to shoes then, I completely agree. If you've got a couple of bikes and you've got Shimano's all over or Kios all over, Speedplays, changing it all is tricky. But if we just go through the major brands, are there any sort of major red lights? If you're riding Shimano and you have tight X or Y, then you should maybe consider something else. Or are there any sort of obvious ones that we can look at before we move on to shoes?
Let me just think. I can't remember the name of it. So for instance, there's a couple of pedals like the Shimano PD R540, for instance. That's maybe not the best pedal to go for, and there's a couple of reasons why. So we'll just take you through this example. The main sort of plate on the pedal, if you like, is actually slightly raised from the pedal body itself. So straight away you're gonna. That's like a reduced that essentially it's making the platform of contact between the pedal and your cleats. It's almost like inherently unstable, if you like, because it's like it's raised compared to the rest of the pedal platform. So you're not ever going to get as much motionless contact between the bottom of your cleat and the top of the pedal surface, and that's a problem because the more unstable that connection is, you're going to lose dexterity. So that's the feeling of control between your foot and the pedal. So that nice feeling of solid connection that you essentially would be unconsciously looking for when you're riding, it's going to be more difficult to achieve. The other thing with this pedal is, for some reason, the axles measure it. But whenever I ride on these pedals, I feel that the stance width is really narrow. It's almost restricting, even compared to for instance, even the 105, the Ultegra, and definitely the Dura Ace pedal. And then even with the Shimano as well, another nice little thing they do is on their Ultegra and Dura Ace pedals, if you need it, they give you extra stance width. And that's something, the standard Look Keo pedal as well, that has a nice sort of extra bit of stance width compared to the Shimano, certainly the entry-level Shimanos. And that's an important feature for a lot of people because, for instance, if your feet are too narrow when you're pedaling, it just makes it really difficult. It can just add a lot of pressure onto your pelvic bones on the saddle, and if your feet are kind of too inside, if you like, your hips, it doesn't really give you a lot of stability and a nice stable platform to push against. And I think I'll always kind of keep coming back over the course of this conversation to dexterity, and you really want to, when with your cleat position and your foot position and shoe position, what you're after is a foot that is not moving around inside the shoe but is not compressed is going to be a happy foot, because as soon as your foot starts moving inside the shoe, independently of the, if you like, the cyclical motion of that pedal stroke, that is movement that is going to require acceleration. So you're going to lose efficiency. You're going to be, so that's like essentially like a dead spot in your pedal stroke. And you're also going to be having to stabilize your foot position to stop any excess movement. So that's, again, not only are you creating dead spots and having to re-accelerate a pedal stroke, you're also going to be fighting, if you like, with energy from your calf and your the muscles in your lower leg, and your foot muscles as well, trying to stabilize that foot inside the shoe. So on that note, there are a lot of little things that you can do, not necessarily with the shoe itself, but inside the shoe to really give you a feeling of control. So that would be looking at and considering things like insoles in your shoes, not the standard insoles that come with most shoes, but like a nice aftermarket set. And I sell a lot of Superfeet insoles, but there's loads of other brands like G8 insoles are really nice. They let you really customize off the bat, and I think Solstar as well. That's another. Just double check. Solstar insoles, yeah, they're another really nice one. They're really nice and low profile, actually. And I think that takes me on to another little thing when we're talking about shoes is, there's so many factors in the shoe itself. So coming away from pedals now, that will allow you or won't allow you to achieve like a comfortable, solid, steady foot position inside your shoe. So we can talk about that. So if you're thinking about even like the thickness of your cycling shoe sole, that's going to be something that's going to be taking your foot further and further away from the pedal axle. So you'd be losing dexterity there, and because your foot's going to have to stabilize against the increased torque, if you like, that's going to require to stabilize. And if you combine that with the wrong pedal, and you combine that with the wrong insole and all the rest of it, you're going to be kind of like fighting a losing battle. It almost won't matter like where your cleat is on the shoe. So I think, there's definitely loads of things like this. I don't know, maybe more specific questions you can ask me, the better, because I think sometimes I can get lost with it.
Well, no, exactly. We'll come on to sort of choosing a shoe, but obviously already we can see that very easily you can create troubles for yourself by making sort of poor purchase decisions. And that comes on to, last week we ran a poll on the hub just to get a sense of how people think about or how they do purchase new bike shoes. And the overriding winner of that poll was that people tended to buy on discount or price online, which, given the potential impact to ride quality, potentially injury, might not be the best way to think about how to buy a shoe or how to choose a shoe. In terms of question to you, if you were someone listening to this, what can they do to firstly ascertain whether the shoes that they've got at the moment are right for them? And secondly, what should people be thinking of when, other than sort of, they should go and speak to a bike fitter about what shoe's right for their fit of their bike. But otherwise, what else should people be thinking about?
I'll try to make my answer as simple as possible. So just because a shoe is on discount online, if you like, it doesn't necessarily make it the right or even the wrong shoe. But if the shoe isn't in the right size, and that could be the length of the shoe or the width of the shoe, for instance, even just those two factors alone, if they're not right, it's going to be almost impossible for you to achieve that nice solid feeling of connection to the cleat that we were talking about earlier on. So what are the things that you can do by looking at your foot to really gain an understanding of if that shoe online is going to work for you or not? Hopefully, if we start there, that might really help. So the best thing you can do is work out, does the shoe that you've got right now work for you or not? So if you take off your shoe and you put your heel on the insole that you've taken out and put it right at the back, as far back as you can put it.
I'm going to do this now again.
Or if you've had your current cycling shoes for a while, you might actually even see where your heel is in contact with the insole itself whilst you're riding along. So if you do that, what you're going to be looking for is, where does your big toe stop? How much extra insole is sticking out, if you like, from in front of your big toe? And does your foot spill out over the edge of your insole? So if you like, your midfoot, does that sort of spill out over the edge of the insole onto the floor underneath it? And if it does, then your shoe probably isn't right for you. The other thing with the length as well is you probably want about 5 mil at least of space in front of your big toe, just to kind of guarantee that your foot isn't getting restricted. But much more than 5 millimeters is a problem, because then you're going to essentially have too much additional volume for that foot. So basically your foot's going to be rolling around inside the shoe, and the upper isn't going to be able to tighten up enough against it. So that's the kind of the basis of it. So what did you get, by the way? Did you?
Yeah, my toes go over the edge out widthways, particularly the big toe comes off the edge, and I can see that from the inner sole as well. The big toe is very worn on the inner sole.
Yeah, so essentially when you're riding along, your big toe is getting crushed by essentially the toe box of the shoe. Would that be right? And your big toe is almost kind of being clawed at the front. Is that right? Is that what you sort of?
I have to say, I've never really had any pain or any issues with my feet. So, but having said that, I've never really looked at my inner soles, and having looked at them, I can clearly see that is an issue. That inner sole sort of wearing down on that big toe, and it's well over the edge, as is the little toe.
Yeah.
So it's on both sides of the foot. So yeah, I obviously feel quite lucky. I've had no issues thus far, but
it's
something I probably need to correct.
Yeah. If you're talking about issues with regards to you've not necessarily had any pain, well, that might well be the case, because it might not be bad enough for you to experience pain, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're missing out on stability. So, for instance, if your shoe is too narrow, if you have a look at your foot, if you look right down at your foot, you've got your big toe joint and your little toe joint. So they form, if you like, the transverse arch across your foot. And if the shoe is too narrow, you've got it kind of creates what you'd call lateral compression. And if you can just start with your hand, so place your one hand on top of the other one and just get your sort of like your thumb and your finger and push, just gently push your I guess your first finger and your pinky finger together. What you'll notice is the sort of arch across your hand. It's the most similar example I can give you easily. Will become sort of compressed too high. And if you liken that onto a shoe, what it means is that the first met and the fifth met will be getting pushed down overly, and you're not going to be able to essentially spread the load of pressure, if you like, across your across the whole ball of your foot. So it's sort of like between the medial metatarsal and the lateral metatarsal. So you're going to have hot spots on the inside and outside of your shoe. So that's a big one.
That's the key one. But that could also probably lead to issues further up the chain as well, could it? In knees and hips.
Yeah. So I guess this is the thing. So it starts to kind of have a kind of knock-on effect elsewhere. So if, say, let's go on this example now where you've got this sort of compressed foot from the first to the fifth met, and your transverse arch is essentially being compressed. Your foot actually has three arches. It's got a medial and a lateral arch and a transverse arch. And if you like, the stability of a foot has been designed around all of those arches getting to kind of spread the load of your body weight across your entire foot. And if one arch is kind of put out, then it's going to essentially be affecting the effectiveness, if you like, of the other two arches. So straight away, if that's compressed, your foot is going to be less stable. So that's putting more pressure on your calf. It's putting more pressure on your quads and more pressure on your glutes to stabilize your leg. Whereas you could have had that stability for free if your foot had just been allowed to hold its natural position. Does that make sense? And then the other thing as well you can do, if you're having to crunch your toes at the front of your cycling shoes, for instance, if your shoe's too small and you physically can't let your foot be naturally sort of spaced out, or your shoe's too long and it's got too much volume in it and you're having to really claw your feet, then you're losing stability because you're going to be shortening the arch too much. And this is where, you could, if you could get some insoles, and that would help that problem to an extent, but still not going to essentially make up for a shoe that is too long or too short. So again, if that medial arch is too restricted, again, that's less stability. You're not going to be ankling as well, so your ankle alignment is going to be off, and then that's more work for your quads, more work for your glutes to kind of correct for that, and that you're going to be losing efficiency for sure.
Yeah, and ultimately it can cost you performance as well, right?
Oh yeah, massively. Yeah. You're going to be losing performance. I mean, I think it's got to be careful because it's very difficult to measure what, like, essentially the amount of watts you would gain or lose, because it can be quite individual. But certainly anything that's going to be reducing the stability of your ankle is a problem, because what you want to be careful to avoid is excessive range of movement in your ankle, because that's definitely going to be losing you power. So for instance, if you look at this is a clinical study, but if you look at like ankle range of motion over like a 30-second Wingate test, so that's a 30-second maximum sprint, and without getting too detailed on the methods of that test, it's the resistance is set to the body weight of the rider. But if you have only 5 degrees more range of motion in an ankle, you're going to be putting out as much as 75 less watts over the course of that test. That's mean power over the course of 30 seconds. So you definitely, if you're losing stability, your ankle and the muscles in your leg aren't going to get the chance to load up the pedal, if you like, because they're going to be losing power to trying to stabilize an ankle position.
So quite conceivably, someone who is pretty dedicated, trains regularly in a structured fashion, who's been training for a number of years, may have bought a pair of shoes or changed shoe and not been able to hit the performance levels they did previously, and probably has checked everything else apart from considering their shoe may have had an impact. That could definitely happen, right?
Oh yeah, massively. I think a lot of the time in bike fits, when someone comes in and they don't have the right shoe, it's quite a difficult one to broach, because I think that you don't necessarily have, you're like, oh, I don't have any issues with my feet. And I think a lot of people that come in and I'm trying to tell them they've got problems with their shoe, they don't necessarily think they've got problems with their feet. But for instance, say your shoe is too big, it's going to be too long, which means that it's going to be difficult for me to get that cleat far enough back. Now, you might have totally adapted your pedaling technique to take that in, but one of the things that's going to be happening is that cleat being too far forward, that's going to cause your leg to come up higher to get over the top of the pedal stroke. So now that increased, if you like, hip flexion, that might be causing you a problem on the saddle, and then we could trace that right back down to the fore-aft cleat position, and then I could get them off the bike, give them a smaller shoe to try on, put a cleat on it, and then, definitely within just changing shoe size, you could make some serious gains to comfort right across the bike, for sure.
That's incredible. So that's a test that everyone can do at home is have a look at their inner soles. Is there anything else that people can do now in terms of just checking their shoes?
Yeah, have a look at your ankle shape and your forefoot shape. So definitely, working back to the foot width thing, just worth quickly mentioning, you want your foot width to be the same as the insole width. So for instance, when you take an insole out the shoe on the shop floor and put it down on the floor and put your foot on top of it, you want your foot to sort of remain within the footprint, if you like, of that insole. Another thing that is often the case is a lot of people don't have their heel correctly stabilized inside the shoe. So a lot of shoes, they don't have a small enough heel cup. So when you're coming back up the pedal stroke again from the bottom up the way, your heel can effectively slip out the top of the heel cup, and that's essentially going to be excessively pointing your toe down, and that's going to make your foot again less stable. You're going to lose again that dexterity, the dexterity of the foot, if you like. It's not going to be as stable. You're going to have to fight against that excessive pointing to then move your foot back down. So again, increased range of motion at the ankle, because you're having to then compensate by essentially, flexing your foot back down again, your heel back down, to get that foot under control before you can start pushing down to go from the top of the pedal stroke once you've got over it. So that's another one, making sure that when you put my shoe on, talk you through it. When you put your shoe on and you tighten it up to comfortable tightness, once it's up, you shouldn't have to ramp your shoe all the way up to not be able to take it off, if you like, from your heel. If you can, when you come in from a night out and you're a bit done, and you can just sort of take your trainers off just by like kicking them off your feet without untying them. You know what I mean? Yeah, you shouldn't be able to do that with your cycling shoes. And if you can, then the chances are the heel's not anywhere near tight enough around the heel bone. So if you're really struggling there, some shoe brands in particular that are good, like really good, but very expensive, would be the S-Works 7 shoe. It's a really nice shoe. Okay. That's got a very tight heel cup. A lot of the Lake shoes, they have this little bit of carbon at the back you can sort of heat up and really squeeze in. Some of the Bont shoes, they allow you to kind of essentially put them in an oven and then really kind of wrap that heel cup around it. And you don't, as long as it's not going to be too tight, because that can cause other problems, but you want to really cut down on the stability of your shoe. The other thing is have a good look at your foot. So for instance, if you have a very, very high arch, then make sure that you've tried on plenty shoes, and especially when you tighten it up and really put your knee over your toes. If you've got a very high arch, if the boa lace or even the normal lace of the shoe isn't in the right position, then the tongue's going to be cutting into your ankle, and that's going to stop you from, if you like, dorsiflexing that foot. So that's pulling the toes up towards the shin. So if you've got a really high arch, you should think about shoes that are either traditional lace-ups like Giro Empire. I've got mixed feelings about those, but then if you're really struggling, maybe like a double boa lace might really help you, because it's going to be tightening up the shoe from two different points as opposed to one boa lace and one set of tension. If you've got really high arches, it's nice to be able to really tighten up the lace around that forefoot, independent of tightening up the lace around your midfoot, because if that arch is quite high and you've got a very high volume midfoot that's sticking up loads in the shoe, the tightness that you want the upper to be at the top of your foot is going to be different to the tightness that you want the boa lace to be around your forefoot, because you want that foot again to be stable. If you don't want to have to be loosening off the lace at your forefoot just to gain that little bit extra if you like, looseness around the front of your ankle in the shoe, then you know that's going to be making your forefoot work extra hard to stabilize when that upper could have been tightened from two places and you wouldn't have to lose anything. So that's another one as well. I think it's important to also mention people with very, very flat feet. You definitely need to think about getting some insoles, because if you think the first thing, if your foot is flat, the chances are it's going to be less stable, because for whatever reason, either you don't have the muscular support around the ankle to help it become stable, or you've got extra lax ligaments in your shoe. First of all, a nice supportive insole that's supporting your navicular bone in your ankle is gonna help you gain stability. The other thing worth mentioning is if you have really flat feet, that essentially splays your forefoot out. So that can actually increase the length of your foot and make you feel like, one or two sizes bigger, if you like, than would actually be suitable if you had a normal arch in your foot. So I guess what I'm getting at is I see a lot of people with very flat feet that have accidentally bought, a size of shoe too big. And then as soon as I put an insole inside that shoe, it can actually change the length of someone's foot.
Oh, wow.
Like significantly. And then, of course, because the foot length has changed, it's going to be difficult to get that cleat back far enough underneath the ball of the foot for effective power transfer. And if you like that, the leverage on that foot with the cleat too far forward, it's again, you're going to be losing. You're going to be excessively dropping your ankle.
I know we're going to do questions at the end, but actually that leads nicely into one question that we had is from someone that has very flat feet, and they have bought metatarsal buttons. I don't know what they are. Do you know what they are?
So metatarsal buttons, they are, if you were to look at an insole, and if you just go back just ever so slightly from the ball of your foot, or even on the ball of your foot itself on the insole, it's basically a couple of millimeters of foam to essentially fill up the void, if you like, that's created by the transverse arch that goes across your foot. And a lot of people find them comfortable because it kind of creates space. If you've got a very flat transverse arch, then you would maybe need one of those, because if the metatarsals in your foot are kind of suffering from too much sort of lateral compression, which they will do if you've got a very flat transverse arch, then you sometimes need a little bit extra support there to sort of allow that transverse arch to take shape. But if your shoe is too narrow and your transverse arch is too high because of the lateral compression, then the chances are a metatarsal button is going to make you feel worse. So you should only really get a metatarsal button if you're either very, very sure that you need it by doing a lot of research on your feet and the specifics of what you need, or you've gone and seen like an orthotist to sort of have a good look and make a set of really nice custom insoles. So they can be more dangerous to pop them in without... Yeah, if the chances are if you've... Well, you'll know very quickly. For instance, metatarsal buttons they're available separately, so you can just like put them on the top of your insole, or you can buy some insoles that already have them in. But the chances are you'll know, because if you don't need a metatarsal button on your insole, you'll have very sore feet. So take it out. But yeah, if you've got a very, very flat foot, the chances are that your transverse arch is quite flat as well. But sometimes just by supporting the navicular bone. So this is actually, put your thumb, just if you go halfway down your arch with your thumb, you might feel quite a prominent bone that's like sticking up sort of quite high on the arch of your foot, but not your medial ankle bone, but you can sort of feel a kind of a prominent bone.
I know exactly.
Yeah, so that navicular one, that's called the navicular, and that's directly connected to the talus and the calcaneus. So if your navicular bone is really, really low and it's kind of creating a very flat arch, yeah, the chances are all of the arches on your feet are flatter than they should be. But this is another really good one where if one foot feels particularly different to another, what you could do is you get someone to help you measure the height of your navicular bone off the floor on your left and right foot. The chances are it'll be different, and there might be one that's significantly lower than the other, potentially on the same foot, that doesn't feel that great when you're riding. So that would be a good thing to sort of like look at. And basically one of the best things you can do if you do have particularly flat feet, especially asymmetrical flat feet, would be to get a set of insoles. And ideally, you know, everyone would have a custom insole inside their cycling shoe, because just really adds a massive amount of additional comfort in your riding position. But even a set of relatively cheap, so £40 Superfeet carbon, they're going to do an awful lot compared to nothing. And you can go cheaper than that, but the reason I like Superfeet in particular is the price point is a place where, you know, you can pick them up online for almost £20, if you know, or you can go along to your local bike shop and buy there, which I would encourage you to do actually if you're unsure about size. But Superfeet carbon, 20 to 40 quid depending on where you buy them, but very, very thin, so they're not going to be taking your foot further away from the pedal spindle. Very, very stiff, so they're not going to deform under load when you're pedaling at higher power output, and very, very comfortable. Other insoles, like for instance like G8 insoles, they're quite good, because sometimes if you have an accident and you smash all the ligaments in your ankle, which actually, like a lot of people that cycle these days come from rugby and football and other sports where the chances are they've got mangled ankles. If you've had ligament damage in your ankle, then the chances are you're going to be really struggling with ankle stability, because the alignment of the bones in your ankle is going to be off, because essentially the alignment of your ankle depends on the ligaments of holding these bones in place in combination with the strength of the muscles in your lower leg to kind of provide support on, you know, as they attach onto the bones in your feet. I guess what I'm getting at there is, yes, if you're listening to this and maybe thinking, oh well, that's great, but surely I don't need to buy a set of insoles to gain ankle alignment. Well, you know, you can definitely improve your ankle stability by sort of strengthening up your ankle with for instance like ankle lifts or like strength conditioning in the ankle joint. But if you've lost, or you know, if you don't have any ankle ligaments due to injury, then the chances are you could do yourself a lot of favours by just going and getting a basic set of insoles. So you go, like a long answer for a short question. Sorry.
Good to know. I just checked the height of the top arch bone. What's it called? The begins with N.
The navicular bone. You should Google navicular bone.
I've just
and find out what it is and learn how to palpate it and measure it. You should measure the height off the floor of your navicular bones and compare left to right. The left's a lot lower than the right. And so is this when you're sitting down or standing up?
Standing up.
Right. So what I want you to do is unweight your foot. So sit back down and take all of the weight off your feet and just put them on the floor. But you can weight them. You know, you can sort of sit there naturally as you would usually like have your feet on the floor. So now go back to that navicular bone.
Now they're the same height.
Yeah. Now from that position, they're the same height right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Now stand up and now measure them again from standing position, which is difficult, but I'll give you a second.
The right one is higher.
Yeah.
Stand up.
Yeah. And now that left foot is kind of maybe splaying out slightly.
Yeah.
Rotated in. Yeah. Okay. So now, I don't know, what have you got lying around? Is there anything you could put underneath that navicular bone to support it? Underneath the navicular bone, yeah. Maybe, how much has it dropped actually compared to when you're sitting down and standing up? Could you quickly tell me if there's a difference in height that's significant?
It's a couple, maybe 3 millimeters, 4 millimeters, half a centimeter probably, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you could just basically, even if you had something about the shape of a finger to put underneath it as you stand up, so obviously not your finger, but if you put something underneath that and stand up, what you'll find is your foot retains a much more natural shape as you go from a seated to a standing position. And no, if you're listening...
It's slightly rotated in as I stood up, which lowered it. Is that right? Would that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So now liken that to you're in a riding position.
Yeah.
And you're pushing down on the pedals with your right foot, which is nice and stable and doesn't move around. Yeah. Yeah. Is that right? Yeah. So that's happy days. But when you push down on your left foot, so when you load that left foot, the navicular bone drops in, so that splays your foot out. The chances are that's going to be wanting to drive your knee in. So that's all energy that you're having to put in with your body to kind of fight to align that foot on top of trying to apply force to a surface that is moving away from you at the time. So you're not only having to try and push power into the pedals, but you're also having to try and stabilize that foot simultaneously, which is difficult. So even a basic insole would be great for you, just to try and plug something in there and stop it moving around. You should experiment with that.
So in terms of shoes, we've ascertained that people can take their inner sole out, have a look, see where their foot position is on the inner sole, check their heel, make sure that that's stable and secure. They're sort of key things people can do today to check their own shoes, aren't they?
Yeah, and check the volume of your midfoot and your forefoot. So if you've got really low volume forefoot, so quite a small height on your forefoot compared to, for instance, if you've got a very, very high prominent arch and then quite a long, low, wide forefoot, the chances are that the lace-up system of your shoe, you'd have to account for that. So if you've got boas, having two boas or having, multiple straps so you can adjust the kind of the compression tension. That's another thing. So if you do have that, if you seem to have very high arches and a very narrow heel and a very low forefoot, you're going to have to get a shoe which will have an adjustable heel so you can tighten it, and multiple boa laces, enough width to kind of cover your forefoot. So again, these shoes do exist. You just have to know that you've got a problem so that you can sort of treat it if you like, and it will be worth treating by buying the right shoe.
Cool. So before we come on to cleats, if people have identified either an issue or a concern, they can drop you a line, or they can go to their local bike shop, or what's the best way for them to make improvements or find the right shoe for them if they've got concerns?
If they've got concerns, just trying on as many shoes as possible. It's very difficult. I mean, it took me a long time. I certainly think going through those steps is a great start. I quite like Lake cycling shoes. They've got quite a good sizing guide on their website that goes through some of the things that I've mentioned there with regards to finding what shoe matches your foot shape and profile. Like, I've got a nice width guide as well, so that's maybe somewhere you can go online to help. They seem to have
a very good reputation, Lake. They seem to have a strong reputation, don't they? A lot of people rave about them
because there's a lot of good to Lake shoes. They're not perfect for everyone, and I'll go through that in a minute, but some of the good points would be they've got a very big fore aft. They've got a slot essentially in almost all of their shoes, which allows additional fore aft movement of the cleat. So Shimano also have that as well, worth mentioning. Lake have a big range of shoe widths, so you can buy up to an extra wide. Some brands of shoes don't even come with any additional width other than standard. So the fact you can get 3 widths with Lake is another plus. They have a couple of different brands that will allow you to buy a couple of different models, that will allow you to buy a shoe that matches your foot shape. So, i.e., if you've got a low forefoot, high volume midfoot, and a small heel, then there's the perfect shoe for that combination. Actually, it's the shoe that I have. So, and then I mentioned there was bad points as well. So, for instance, Lake, the thickness of their soles is quite high, which, if you think back to earlier on this conversation, is going to be taking your foot further away from the center of rotation of the pedal. So that, I don't have any problems with excessive range of motion in my ankles, thankfully, so I don't have to worry necessarily too much for that. But for instance, to compare that with Bont, they've got a very, very low stack height. Same with Giro as well, very low stack height. If you're struggling for stability in your foot, maybe avoiding Lake with a very thick stack height on it might actually be something you want to consider. The other thing as well is you think about the heel kick. So this is the difference in height between the forefoot and the heel. So a lot of cycling shoes, if you look at it from the side, you'll notice that the heel comes up relative to the forefoot, and that's to allow your foot to essentially load the forefoot through the bottom of the pedal stroke. But actually, sometimes that can cause your foot to be in an excessively pointed position, so to plantar flex. Now, if you're standing up on your feet, the most stable position that you'll find is, when your foot is essentially at a 90-degree angle. So if you were to then jack something underneath your heels, the most obvious example is high-heeled shoes. If you wear high-heeled shoes, your foot is in a pointed position, then that's inherently less stable because your ankle is far less stable when it's in a flexed position like that. Now, I'm not likening cycling shoes or a lot of cycling shoes to high-heeled shoes, but it puts the point in that if you're talking about a marginal gain, there's enough of a difference in height there to definitely cause problems.
just to go onto that stack then on the other side, on the conversation we had the other day, we mentioned people that have a poor range of movement for a squat.
Yeah.
And I think people with very tight hips and weak glutes will often find that a little bit of elevation on the heels will help them get into a deeper squat. Would that also work for the shoes as well? So could it be a benefit for some people to have a little bit of a kick at the back of the shoe?
That's a good question. I mean, I think but the thing is that then you're bleeding in other elements of the pedal stroke, like and other factors like crank length. So, for instance, the benefits of a really flat shoe would be you could bring the pelvis forward. So if you're sitting in your chair and if you force your ankles down, what you might notice is almost has this effect of pulling your hips forward. Don't know if you can notice that. Yeah. So on the bike, if you had a more level foot, you could put the saddle forward and you would bring your pelvis closer to the bottom of the pedal stroke. So that's reducing the distance between your pelvis and the bottom of the pedal stroke. Effectively, it means you can run a slightly lower saddle height. And because you're closer to it, that's less extension for your body. So that's going to be slightly more control, improved. Again, that word dexterity, your foot will feel more natural on the pedal. Heel kick. But you're right. What if you've got very, very tight calves when you're in a gym? You can, for a lot of people, put sort of really high ankled sort of like weightlifting shoes in. It takes the roll out slightly. It's still going to mean that you're going to be loading your quad more than if you didn't have to jack your heels up. You'll notice that if you'll find greater activation in your quads most likely when you point your toe, and that's because you're all of a sudden your quad's responsible for making up for that lack of range of motion that the calf isn't doing anymore. Because your knee flexion, your knees, you've got more, you're relatively for the same depth of squat there, your knee is more flexed. But this is, you're taking a problem out of the ankles and you're essentially putting it onto the knee. Yeah.
Which may work in the gym.
Yeah.
What you don't want to like.
Yeah. There's so many different ways. It is such a complex issue that it is very difficult. And I'll be straight up, despite spending a lot of time researching, I constantly find that I've got slight gaps in my knowledge in places. I'm not perfect. But I would think on that note that certainly if you've got very, very tight calves, you might want to think about mobilizing them when you ride on your bike. But having an additional heel kick inside your shoe, I would be, if you're struggling with stability, you might want to avoid that. That's for sure.
Yeah, actually, it might make it worse, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
The best thing people can do though is my email. If you can put that on the bottom of this podcast, I'm more than happy to take a call and happily answer some questions. And I think one of the nice things about having a nice network of other bike fitters in the world that I know is I certainly any question that I don't know how to answer, I've almost got someone in my back pocket that will be able to answer it, very well. So if I can't answer it, then I'll certainly put you on to someone that I think can. So that's it. Feel free to take me up on that. But
yeah, I was going to say, in terms of a good overview for people to sort of check their shoes and whether they're right and things they might want to consider. And ultimately, leading on to that would be cleats. Are there any sort of quick things that people can do now today just to check their cleats are in the right position?
A lot of the time I see people, they say, "Oh, I've put my cleat underneath the ball of my foot." And to them, the ball of their foot is the joint of their big toe. But if you look down at your foot, actually the ball of your foot goes from the first metatarsal to the fifth metatarsal. And actually your fifth met is further back than your first met. So what you want to try and do is if you're trying to get the right sort of fore-aft cleat position, roughly, a nice little thing it would be to locate your first met and fifth met and make sure that on the bike you can get the cleat in between those two as opposed to just underneath the first met. So that would be something. A lot of the time, actually, I find that people they come in with their cleats too far forward. So the chances are, if you had a really good look at where your cleat position was fore and aft, if you put your shoe on, if you palpated your first met and your fifth met and mark those locations on the shoe, take your shoe off and look at where that cleat actually is, I bet you there'd be a significant percentage of the fifth met that isn't covered at all by cleat, which will mean that you're definitely going to be missing out on stability and power transfer. So that's the first one.
Well, that's something that's 100% for me. I mean, I didn't realise that the ball of foot was referring to across all I just thought it was that first metatarsal ball. Literally, it looks like a ball. That's why it's a bit misleading, right?
Yeah. And another thing as well you could look into with cleat position is if you seem to have like excessive heel rub on your cranks or even your frame. I've seen people come in actually with what it looks like someone's taken an angle grinder to their crankset, but actually it's just their heels been bashing the crankset every time the pedal goes round. Now it's very difficult with describing how to adjust a cleat, because essentially what you're doing is you're flipping a shoe upside down and then reversing. So if your heel seems to be hitting your crank excessively and you turn your shoe around, the chances are that your foot will be too far back on the pedal. So, you might need to move the cleat back to move your foot further forward. The other thing as well is the outside of the cleat. So that's the bit of the cleat that's underneath your small toe might relatively be too far forward, and that's going to be causing your heel to rotate in the way. So when you push down, you're kind of pushing down with your foot in almost like a plie position, or sort of an excessively sort of rotated position. So you're going to be striking your heel. So that's maybe one thing. Another signal that your cleat's in the wrong position is if you seem to have excessive heel rub on your cranks or frame.
Yeah, Doug, actually, that was one of the questions that we had for today's conversation. Someone said that they are sometimes clipping their left ankle on the chainstay of their frame.
Yeah, so that would be, assuming he doesn't have absolutely massive feet, which is an issue actually for some people in the shape of chainstays. The chances are his cleat isn't far enough back, and also the angle of the cleat is set so that it's actually kind of restricting the ankle to sort of rotate out and be sort of underneath. So if you think about, it's difficult with cleat angle because there are reasons why you might want to set it any such way. So for instance, and it changes what angle you have your cleat at can change for a factor of reasons. So for instance, a good way of finding out if you need your cleats to allow your feet to turn out or not is if you sort of stand up and you squat. If you sort of squat down and your forefoot tends to kind of rotate out and your ankles come in, and this is independent of your foot rolling in or pronating in the way. I'm talking about the rotation of your foot as a whole. If you tend to find that that's much more comfortable, the chances are you want to have a slight amount of that kind of reflected in the cleat position. So that might be, as I'm looking at my right shoe, the big toe is towards the inside. So the right hand side of my right shoe, as I'm looking at the cleat, you might want to kind of pull that down slightly and rotate the bit of the cleat that's underneath the little toe up slightly, and that will just reflect that very slightly. But now, if I was to increase the stance width of your pedal, so wider pedals, so that's speed play, or that's the Shimano system with the 4mm additional axle. If you did that same squat with wider foot, with a wider stance width, the chances are that your foot wouldn't pronate in as much and your foot wouldn't rotate out the way as much, so that you can change what angle of your cleat will feel more comfortable if you can work out what's causing that foot to drive in, if that makes sense.
So yeah, and that comes back to the bit what we just talked about on the shoe. So cleat position may be one thing, but if there's instability in that foot that's clipping the chainstay, that could be because of something else as well, right?
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah. Yeah, exactly. This is the thing. It's such a case-by-case basis. So again, I would welcome anyone to phone me up or write a question. Again, not that busy at the moment. So the chances are they'll get their question answered.
And obviously you're doing these video audits as well. I haven't got you the videos yet, but we will do that before our next conversation. But you are doing these video audits if anyone's interested in connecting with Doug, and he's basically doing a 90-minute overview of your position remotely via video. I'm sure you can pick up a lot of these issues over a video conversation. Oh yeah,
definitely. It's all just about having a conversation, really, sort of working out what's causing your issues. Definitely looking for me is a huge one. Actually looking at what's going on. Unless someone is very good at describing exactly what they're feeling, it's much easier, obviously, just to look at them.
Yeah, and it's not only the describing thing. I mean, I think for me, just having a look at my inner soles, as you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, I had no, you don't know until you know. I had no idea until I looked at the inner soles, and it's very, very clear. And I'm sure that's potentially causing issues that I've got elsewhere on the bike fit. So all these things are related, right?
Oh yeah, massively, yeah.
Shall we go to, I think we've answered a lot of the questions throughout the conversation, but should we just whiz through some of the questions that people have sent in?
Yeah.
So where should we start? You mentioned, we discussed a leg length discrepancy in our last conversation. Someone has asked us if it's a structural issue rather than shimming, could you look at different crank length?
Yeah, I mean, in theory, you could. The best crank length is always the one that is, is very proportional to your leg length. So if you've got a structurally shorter leg, it might be a better way because by doing that, you're reducing the need for a shim. So you're not going to be taking that foot away from the pedal spindle. So having thought about it, yeah, if you have cranks of different lengths kicking around, I don't see any reason why you might not want to give it a go. It's something that I've actually never experimented with, changing crank length as opposed to changing putting shims in. Yeah. Definitely I'd be interested. I've got these little accelerometers that you can put on someone's shoes and pick up sort of dead spots, and you can put them on someone's quads as well and sort of look at sort of knee and leg angular range and foot angular range. I'd be interested actually to experiment with that in the studio, but it's something I've not tried, but I can't see any reason. The downside is you'd have to buy 2 sets of cranks, which cost £200 each roughly. And that's just for Ultegra.
Yeah.
Or more.
Yeah, Dura Race or whatever. Yeah, exactly. Or something specific. Next question is with regards to the cleats themselves. A lot of cleat brands have different coloured cleats and different options. What are your sort of general views? Obviously, Shimano, I think most people wear yellow. What's the benefits of going blue? Or is it a lot of marketing? What are your views on different cleats for different pedal systems?
Well, any additional rotation is definitely going to be an invitation for less stability to creep in and again, like reducing dexterity. I certainly find that for most people, if we stick with Shimano, for instance, the yellows are quite good. If you've got a nice, if your body doesn't have to compensate for any, for instance, like things like we've talked about there with feet, like pronation and rotation as you go through the pedaling range of motion. If you don't have any of those issues, then the chances are you don't need any additional rotation in that cleat position to make up for a tendency of your body to rotate. And the whole idea of that float is to give your foot somewhere to go rather than passing that, if you like, that additional torsional forces sort of into your joints. Like a lot, your knee joint, for instance, doesn't really like to rotate. It just likes to sort of flex and extend. So if you tend to have poor movement in your ankles, poor movement in your feet, then the chances are you're going to want to take everything you can get with your cleat choice. So if you have speed play as well, you can actually open up the float loads. But you don't necessarily, you're definitely going to be, if you overcompensate and open it up all the way, you're going to be losing power for sure, because your foot's just going to be rotating. It's going to be difficult for you to grab, and really kind of push down on that cleat with a nice solid connection. So it's a difficult balance of not trying to overcompensate, but also not trying to limit yourself too much, because any rotation that you're putting into the knee and hips, that's going to have negative effects on saddle comfort.
Okay, I mean, everything's connected, isn't it? It's crazy.
Yeah, everything is connected.
I think all the other questions we covered off, obviously the metatarsal buttons we discussed and the ankle clicking the chainstay, they're two things that we have discussed. Is there anything else as we wrap things up that you wanted to bring up or mention? Or
it's difficult, as I think we've covered quite a lot there. I mean, not that I'm reluctant. I think a lot of it will bleed into people's specifics. If they've got any specific questions, I encourage them to get in touch, because I really will answer, I really have a look. But I think a lot of the time with, I guess, recapping the conversation is that working out where the problems are coming from by having a good look at your limitations, having a common sense look, for instance, is the shoe going to allow me to get a good cleat position? How will I be able to tell? Right, well, ideally I'll go and see it, but I can check how long it is online, and I can put my foot on the insole and make sure that it's going to fit inside that shoe without being compressed or be rolling around outside. You'd surprise yourself. Don't buy shoes based on an emotional investment. try and buy them off the back of common sense. And the same with your cleat positions. Sorry, your pedal.
It will
pedal
make you more
choice.
comfortable, and it will affect your performance as well. That's the key thing, right?
Yeah,
it can generally impact
massively.
your ability on the bike.
Yeah, and this is one where you really have to go. If you're unsure and you want to ask someone more questions locally, really try and find an experienced bike fitter who's been there before and has a good range of a different number of shoe brands. And unless you really can't feel any reason why, try and just avoid buying the cheapest set of shoes that you can find because they're cheap, or buying the most expensive set of shoes because you think they're going to be the best. It really boils down to, will this shoe allow my foot to be in a stable position inside it and allow me to get that cleat placed underneath the shoe in a position that matches the length and profile of my foot. And if not, then that probably will have an effect on pretty much everything else, in my bike position.
Yeah. And the interesting point there is, Dougie, is that obviously we're all influenced by the pros, and a lot of the pros are having to wear shoes that they're endorsed by. And I wonder if that A, causes them issues, but B, it's certainly something that everyone should consider. Don't go buy the third shoe of your favorite rider. You really need to buy the best shoe that's correct for you in your body type and your fit, basically.
Yeah, I mean you kind of hit the nail on the head. A lot of riders, they just get given a set of shoes at the start of the year. They really don't have any say in the matter. A lot of the, if you look really closely, a lot of the top pros, they either won't have the same shoes that their teammates have on, or they'll have essentially some spray paint or some electrical tape over the logo of the shoe brand that they're actually riding to hide it. Especially these days, it's so specific. Sometimes people's, pardon the pun, they just put their foot down and they just won't consider riding any other shoe, because you can lose so much comfort and so much power just with the wrong cleat and shoe position that it's difficult for their team managers just to come and say, oh, well, you're riding this because we say so, and that's that. If you don't have the results on paper over the years, then you won't have as much clout to affect that position. But definitely don't take it on face value. The shoe a pro is riding isn't necessarily a shoe that is any good for them. It's more often than not the shoe they're being told to ride.
Yeah, fascinating. That's always worth considering, given we're all so influenced by marketing and various things you read. Dougie, thank you so much for taking the time to join us again today. We will definitely have everyone checking their shoes and cleat positions. And
yeah, please get in touch with your questions.
Definitely. And we'll have you back on again to talk about maybe performance fit or TT fit in the next week or two.
Yeah, great. Yeah, looking forward to that as well. Got some good ideas there.
Thanks for your time, mate. Good to speak to you as always, and we'll speak very soon.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
Thanks, mate. Please subscribe to the podcast, and more importantly, don't forget to download the Unfound app and join cyclists from around the world on the Hub. We'll see you on there.